Your Filipino last name is actually Chinese. Here's why. Your last name is Santos, Cruz, Reyes, de la Cruz, Garcia. You've always thought it sounded Spanish and Catholic, right? Your whole life you've identified as Filipino with Spanish heritage. Then a DNA test arrives. 30% Chinese. You're stunned. How is that possible? Your name is Spanish. Your family has been Catholic for generations. Here's what nobody ever told you. Back in the 1800s, Spain forced Chinese immigrants in the Philippines to abandon their names or face brutal persecution. Your Spanish surname? It's actually concealing Chinese blood. 1 in 5 Filipinos carries Chinese DNA, yet most have no idea. Spain deliberately erased Chinese Filipinos by stripping away their names and making them invisible. Picture yourself walking through Manila's Binondo district. The air carries the scent of incense and siopao. Street signs display both Spanish surnames and Chinese characters side by side. A Filipino family celebrates Christmas in December and the Lunar New Year in spring. But here's the historical mystery that scholars tried to suppress for centuries. Why do genetic studies reveal that nearly 20% of Filipinos carry Chinese DNA? More unsettling, why did the Spanish colonial government actively work to hide this? What became of the Chinese traders who arrived centuries before Magellan ever reached the Philippines? Today, we're uncovering a hidden chapter of history, the story of the Sanglay, Chinese merchants who didn't simply trade with Filipinos, they became Filipino, the forgotten arrival. Let's travel back to the 9th century. That's over 600 years before Spain colonized the Philippines. While Europe struggled through the Dark Ages, Chinese trading junks were already sailing across the Philippine archipelago. But history books skip over this part. These weren't casual trading voyages. Archaeological evidence from Butuan proves Chinese traders built permanent settlements. They married local women, they had children, they taught Filipinos advanced techniques in porcelain making and silk weaving. The Chinese called the Philippines Maay, the land of gold. They were right. The islands held gold, pearls, and exotic woods that Chinese emperors desperately wanted. In exchange, Chinese merchants brought porcelain, silk, and something even more valuable, a commercial revolution. By the 13th century, long before Spain and America arrived, thriving Chinese Filipino communities already flourished across Luzon, Mindoro, and Sulu. The Sanglay, neither Chinese nor Filipino. Now the story becomes truly fascinating. When Spanish conquistadors arrived in 1565, they encountered something unexpected. Thousands of Chinese merchants were already living in Manila. They spoke Tagalog, they'd married local women, they controlled the entire economy. The Spanish called them Sanglay, a distorted version of the Hokkien word sangli, meaning business or trader. But the Sanglay faced an impossible situation. Consider their position. They were too Chinese for the Spanish, too Filipino for China, too Catholic for traditional Chinese society. They existed in a liminal space, occupying a third identity that belonged nowhere and everywhere. The Spanish needed them desperately. The Sanglay controlled 90% of retail trade. They dominated the blacksmith industry, producing weapons and tools. They managed food supply chains, banking systems, and credit networks. Without the Sanglay, the Spanish colony would have collapsed within weeks. Yet this dependency bred resentment and fear among colonial authorities. Here's something worth noting. I'm building a database of Filipino surnames that actually hide Chinese ancestry. Santos, Cruz, Reyes, we know these ones, but there are dozens more that people don't recognize as converted Chinese names. If your last name is Filipino and your DNA test shows Chinese ancestry, share your surname in the comments, just the surname. Let's crowdsource the real list together. If you want more videos exploring hidden Filipino history, subscribe to Chronicle of Islands for updates. If your surname is Filipino and a DNA test revealed Chinese ancestry, share it in the comments, just the surname.
Let's build a real database together of names hiding Chinese heritage. And if you want more stories uncovering the hidden layers of Filipino history, keep watching Chronicle of Islands. The Parian, Manila's original Chinatown. In 1581, Spanish Governor Gonzalo Ronquillo made a choice that would echo through centuries of Filipino-Chinese relations. He established the Parian. This walled district sat just outside Intramuros, Manila's fortified Spanish center. The logic was calculated and cold. Keep the Chinese near enough to exploit them, yet far enough away to control them. But the Parian became something the Spanish never anticipated. A vibrant hybrid culture bloomed within those walls. Chinese merchants married indigenous Filipino women. These unions weren't accidental. They were encouraged, since Chinese women rarely made the journey across the sea. Their children, known as mestizo de sangre, lived in 3 worlds simultaneously. They spoke Hokkien at home, Tagalog in the streets, Spanish in church. They celebrated both the Feast of San Lorenzo and the Moon Festival. They ate adobo with chopsticks. They were building something entirely new, a Chinese Filipino identity. But history books gloss over the darkness. They skip the massacres. They ignore the truth. The massacres history forgot. In 1603 and 1639, the Spanish colonial government orchestrated at least 3 major massacres targeting Chinese residents. The worst came in 1603. The spark? A rumor.
Las autoridades españolas oyeron rumores de que un mandarín chino navegaba hacia Manila para conquistarla. El temor consumió al liderazgo colonial. La paranoia se expandió como pólvora entre las filas españolas. El gobernador ordenó un ataque preventivo. Más de 20,000 chinos fueron asesinados en un solo mes. Quiero que asimilen esa cifra. 20,000 personas, familias enteras, comerciantes que habían construido vidas en Manila a través de generaciones, hombres con mujeres filipinas, sus mestizos hijos, desaparecieron. Aquí está la ironía histórica que revela la desesperación española. Menos de 2 años después, suplicaban a los comerciantes chinos que regresaran. ¿Por qué ese cambio tan repentino? La economía había colapsado completamente. Nadie sabía cómo hacer funcionar los negocios que los chinos habían dirigido. Las cadenas de suministro de alimentos estaban rotas. Los soldados españoles estaban muriendo. Los Sanglis regresaron. Y el ciclo de dependencia, resentimiento y violencia continuó volviendo a girar. By the 18th century, something remarkable shifted. The mestizo de Sanglay became the Philippines' economic elite. These Chinese Filipino mestizos faced rejection from both Spanish society and pure Chinese communities. So they did something brilliant. They built their own power structure. They dominated as inquilinos, land lease middlemen, comerciantes, merchant class, craftsman guild leaders, and controllers of provincial trade networks. Names like Cojuangco, Palanca, Gokongwei, and Sai rose to prominence. These weren't originally Spanish or Filipino names. They were Chinese names that evolved and transformed. Cojuangco derives from the Hokkien Gokenko. Gokongwei comes directly from its Hokkien roots. Here's the hidden history most never learn. Many prominent Filipino families during the Spanish era were actually mestizos de Sanglay who Hispanicized their names to dodge discrimination. They became invisible in plain sight. In 1849, Governor Narciso Clavería issued the Catálogo Alfabético de Apellidos, forcing every Filipino to adopt a Spanish surname from an official list. For Chinese Filipino mestizos, this decree was simultaneously oppression and opportunity. Families with names like Tan, Lim, and Go suddenly became Torres, Mendoza, and Gomez. It was cultural erasure, yes, but it also allowed them to vanish into Filipino society, to escape the anti-Chinese discrimination that plagued their communities, to climb higher in colonial society. By the late 1800s, you witnessed a fascinating phenomenon: Filipino nationalists with Chinese blood fighting against Spain. José Rizal himself, the national hero, carried Chinese ancestry through his mother's line. The mestizos weren't just present in the Philippine Revolution, they funded it, led it, and died for it.
The mestizos weren't merely participants in the Philippine Revolution. They financed it, commanded it, and sacrificed their lives for it. Multiple waves of Chinese migration reshaped Filipino-Chinese identity throughout the 20th century. Wave 1, 1900 to 1935. After Spanish rule ended, American colonial authorities adopted a more lenient approach. Fresh Chinese immigrants arrived from Fujian province, fleeing poverty and warlord violence. Wave 2, 1945 to 1949. The Chinese Civil War became a turning point. When Mao's communists seized power, wealthy Chinese merchants escaped to the Philippines, bringing capital, established business networks, and entrepreneurial expertise with them. Wave 3, 1960s to 1980s. This integration period witnessed something unexpected. Marcos's dictatorship paradoxically accelerated Filipino-Chinese integration through economic policies that rewarded business elites. By the 20th century's end, Chinese Filipinos controlled between 60 and 70% of the Philippine economy, despite representing only 1 to 2% of the population by pure ancestry. Yet remember that 20% genetic figure. Centuries of intermarriage created it. Most Filipinos carrying Chinese DNA remain completely unaware of their heritage. The genetic evidence reveals the hidden truth. Recent DNA studies show the real picture. A 2021 genetic study discovered that approximately 18 to 22% of lowland Filipinos carry Chinese Y chromosome markers, evidence of Chinese male ancestry. The highest concentrations appear in Metro Manila at 35 to 40%, Pampanga at 25 to 30%, Iloilo at 20 to 25%, and Cebu at 18 to 22%. Here's what makes this fascinating. The DNA tells a story of integration, not invasion. These genetic markers are ancient, many dating back 400 to 800 years. This wasn't colonial conquest. This was intermarriage, commerce, and cultural fusion. Filipino culture absorbed Chinese elements so completely that people no longer recognize them. Look at the food. Pancit, lumpia, siopao, mami, all derive from Chinese cuisine. The language carries Tagalog words like kuya, ate, and suki. Business culture features the sari-sari store concept and card games. Religion blends folk Catholicism with Chinese ancestor veneration. Filipino-Chinese identity continues evolving today. Ask young Filipino-Chinese millennials whether they're Chinese or Filipino, and you'll hear varied answers. Some say, "I'm Filipino with Chinese heritage." Others respond, "I'm Chinese Filipino," both equally.